We've got a good group here today, so thank you everyone for logging on and joining this mentorship session. Today we have Chris Patton here. He's near Yankton, South Dakota, and he's going to talk a little bit more about elderberry as a commercial crop and the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative. So I'm going to turn it over to him. And as I said, we'll have some time for discussion and questions at the end, but if you want to hang on to your question by sticking them in the chat, that's fine too.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Nice to meet you by Zoom here and give you a little bit of background on elderberry and the cooperative. I've been working with elderberry since 2011. It's been really started as a commercial crop around 2000 in Missouri by Terry Durham in conjunction with the University of Missouri, Andrew Thomas, and a whole team of other folks there. They started out with horticultural studies. They've done some health benefit studies. They've got some human mouse models there that they've used, which were very encouraging on elderberry's capacity for healing and reversing damage from things like stroke and heart attack and dementia. And they have done some clinical trials with dementia patients that showed with regular consumption of elderberry, they had improved cognitive capability. And then, of course, it's very famous as an antiviral. It's less famous as an anti-inflammatory. It's very powerful. And mostly what happens is people think of it as a European ingredient if they think about it at all. I mean, in fact, recently we had a news article from research done in Washington State on elderberry as a substitute for Ozempic as a natural weight loss, and there was some statistical benefits demonstrated. And when Fox News reported it, they talked about European elderberry, when in fact that study was using juice made from American elderberries in Missouri. So there's a lot of basic understanding in the public that needs help. And as farmers, if you're out selling, you will be in a position of educating people. And the cooperative website is a resource for that. It's basically midwest-elderberry.coop. I stopped doing website design about 12 years ago, so I have like 3 mini sites. The main site you come to is basically for online sales, but there is a health tab and there's a grower tab where there's some brief ideas introduced, but in the first paragraphs there are links to whole mini sites with additional documented, peer-reviewed academic articles and health kind of articles on the elderberry, and then a lot of material on growing should you want to explore growing further, particularly on the presentations page, which has presentations going back for 14 years. And so you can see the progress in the whole thing. There's some videos there as well. Today, I'm going to give you an overview. I'm going to assume that if you're already growing specialty crops, you have a market in place, and this will help you to fit, where elderberry might work for you. Most of the elderberry production in the United States today is small producers from 1 to 3 acres. And most of those are producing their own products, be it a syrup or a juice or jam or jelly or something like that, or they sell to a local winery or brewery. And it's been very successful in that regard. And it faces a lot of challenges as a commercial crop dealing with the imports. And that's because basically the plants are different in Europe. In Europe, it's more tree form, like hazelnuts and filberts. And here in America, it's bush form. Our berries are a lot smaller than the European berries, but they taste way better. They have a greater variety of antioxidant vectors. 7 different primary ones. The Europeans have 4. We have the same 4 plus additionals. So the research done in Europe is broadly applicable to American elderberry, but American elderberry has some additional anti-cancer potential. And And then some of the other extra antioxidants actually help to preserve the potency a little longer in the berry. And it's like almost anything else, less processed is better. And the American elderberry has virtually no meaningful levels of glycosides or protocyanides, unlike the Europeans. So you can eat raw elderberries safely and raw elderberry juice if you're not allergic to them. You know, allergies are always there, and everyone's tolerance is a little different. And it is got a lot of fiber, so it will push things through you if you have a little too much, especially when you're still getting used to it. And, you know, in my age, I've also found that the reports that it would help with things like arthritis and stuff like that, and the pains, and just is generally that's what I've experienced, and I rarely get sick either. So, and because it's natural, you know, you're not really going to hurt if you take too much. And basically, it's like anything else with natural medicine. You know, you're better off to take it over a long period of time in a preventative basis, and then you ramp up if you've got a situation. My grandfather was a naturopath. You know, he was licensed in 1932, and he practiced down in Tucson. I sort of grew up in this kind of environment and reading that kind of stuff even as a kid. So without any much further, we'll get into this. Oh yeah. And one other thing I wanted to mention about our American elderberry, Sambucus nigra canadensis, it's what they call an oligospecies, and it ranges from basically the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic and the Gulf. And within that, there's huge variety within the singular species. So, for instance, our flowers here in the Midwest have a very powerful aroma. I grew 6 years north of Minneapolis near Scandia, Minnesota, with Paul Otten, who I co-founded the co-op with. He was a long experienced specialty crop and berry grower, past president of American Bramble Association, had a nursery and everything else. And, you know, he grew raspberries and blueberries and Juneberries and a lot of black currants. He was an international expert on currants for, you know, raspberries, strawberries. So he had a pretty good operation, and we grew elderberries together for 6 years. But our field, we had only about maybe an acre and a half of elderberries. But I mean, I could smell it a half mile away with the wind blowing, right? They are very beautiful, and the flowers are also a very valuable crop. Most people, and I'm not going to talk too much about that, so I'll do this while I'm thinking of it. But the flowers can be sold fresh, and you can do some things with them fresh. Typically, people will make a simple syrup with the flowers, infusing the flowers in the syrup, and then that can be added to lemonade or ciders or things like that. If you concentrate it, and you can make it from also, well, basically the syrup is used also for making things like liqueurs and wine and that sort of thing too. So that's, and you can make the syrup from dried flowers. So typically people will dry flowers when they pick them in order to keep them, because they don't last very long. I have frozen them, and then a year later take them out frozen. If you make a syrup quickly with the frozen flowers, that works as well. And there's a company in Canada called Suro, and that's how they make their elderflower syrups. Anyway, so this is we're going to look at the market, and then when we get to the end, we'll talk a little bit more about the plant and growing it, and there'll be a larger or more focused discussion on small production and what you can do. But basically, this is the overview of what the current market is, and mostly the berries are frozen because they don't last very long fresh. If you've got a customer that wants them fresh, you better arrange that in advance and deliver it to them the day or the next day, so they can use it. So like I said, dried flowers, I mean, this is a huge market. Thousands and thousands of pounds are imported. You know, probably 1,000,000 pounds of dried berries, Frontier Co-op, Mountain Rose Herbs, and a whole bunch of others. And they're coming from places like Bulgaria, and Hungary and Serbia, and that part of Europe in particular. And the thing there is that you're competing against seasonable labor. You know, the Roma or gypsies would be pickers. And in Europe, anything wild collected is labeled certified organic. And that, of course, is just one of the rules that broadly we have to deal with, because there's a treaty between the US and Europe to accept either side's, you know, classification as certified organic. Well, wild collected is certified organic. And I do have on the health mini site an article published in Europe where they've shown that you know, wild collected have about 50% of the nutrition of farmed certified organic elderberries in Europe even. And so you can be sure that what's shipped to the United States is not the highest quality of European berries or flowers too. That's just the truth. And when you compare what our farmers are producing here with what's imported, they are far superior in both their aroma and in other qualities if you pay attention while you're doing it. And therefore you can get a premium over the European prices, at least a certain extent. Juices, jams, jellies, wines, these are main production of small producers who are selling them. And then you get into more processed, puree, bulk juice, syrup. Syrup's probably the number one thing that small producers make and sell, followed by jams and jellies. People who do wines often have other grapes or something like that. And so they're already set up for doing wine. It works well with apple cider because you can use an apple press to press the elderberries, and then you can blend them. And so you can do either the berries or you can do the flowers with cider. And then you get into the high processed extracts, concentrates, powders, and then various dyes, usually made from pumice powder or something like that. And the co-op is actively working on commercial scale. For instance, this market here on the extracts, concentrates, and powders is over $100 million US market, and it's all being imported. And we're working to take a share of that for American farmers. So this is a bit of a timeline. As I mentioned, it started in 2000. As far as commercial production, that doesn't mean people weren't collecting and using it. You know, European pioneers that came over here, they recognized the plant, but it was too much work because our berries are much smaller than the European berries. And so they left them in the hedgerows for personal use, but never really did much with marketing them to consumers. Because there are technical challenges. We'll get to that a little bit later. This is also we're about 30,000 acres of cultivated elderberry in Europe, and then there's more that they collect from the wild, as I mentioned. And this is summarizing some of the other points. Missouri is the leader because they've had university cooperation from 2000. And it is the number one commercial berry in Missouri. They have 350 acres of production. There is a lot of interest and unmet demand for native elderberry. Consumers today, you have a lot easier time. They've heard about it. It's gotten some press. It's gone beyond just what their mother made them go pick or their grandmother made them go pick. And so there is a really good potential that I believe, and especially I've sampled elderberry juice to probably over 100,000 consumers, and even if they don't like it, they say it tastes better than they thought it would. So, you know, that's a pretty good way to go if you're starting out with that. And just as an example, the co-op is a Minnesota cooperative. That's where our legal structure is. And I lived there until 4 years ago. My wife was born in Minneapolis, but she's got relatives in Lincoln County. And so when things got a little bit too much with ashes from the police station locally falling on our lawn from George Floyd, et cetera, we moved. And so we've come to where her mother's two sisters and their rather extended families now live. But for example, in Minnesota, they only have 800 acres planted in fruits, and I don't need to give you guys a song and dance on specialty crops, versus all the millions of acres of corn and soybeans, et cetera. But this is just an example, and they don't think that those 800 acres, provide any more than maybe 5 to 10% of what the state consumes in fruit. So the state is very desirous of increasing fruit production, and I've had good support from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture with the growers I have there. I do have growers from coast to coast, but most of them are concentrated in the Midwest, and it's an open cooperative, and I haven't pushed people for members, so I have about 31 members, but work with about 150 farmers. So we have a plan, and we have some grants, especially once things start flowing again from Washington, towards being able to accommodate 200 acres of planted elder in Minnesota, being able to process that and turn it into primarily commercial ingredients. Typically, for anyone, you're going to get 3,000 to 6,000 pounds an acre. Usually, you can get a little bit more down south than here. They have issues down there with the soil is much harder to keep the organic material in the soil. It's easier to do that up here. But basically, if you plan on 3,000, you end up getting 4,000 pounds. You're ahead. Like anything else, weather's a factor, and basically, as we've looked at it over the last 15 years or so, it's kind of like out of 5 years, you've got 3 reasonable years for harvest. You probably have one that doesn't wash out and one that's substandard. And that's one of the things the co-op does is when we have members, some of them, even have businesses where they sell more products and they grow berries. So one of the main things we do is supply our member farmers. And like I've got a pallet of 1,500 pounds going from Missouri to New York. I just sent in the final paperwork on it to from one member to another. In order to, New York, they're closer to a bigger market, and they never can grow enough. So we're sending berries from there, and then that keeps their business going. But then other times there's been growers in the Midwest, and for one reason or another, they had a bad harvest. They can get berries from the co-op and from another grower. But the price, basically, we're looking to try to deliver $3.50 a pound on a commercial scale, but selling directly, you can get anywhere from $7 to $10 easily selling certified organic berries. Technical challenges. First of all, elderberries are like tomatoes. They're determinate or indeterminate. Basically, that means that they will either bloom and develop fruit once, or they'll continuously flower and bear fruit until they die because of the cold at the change of season. There's also a variation on them. Will they harvest on a primal cane or on first year's growth off an existing cane? Typically in the wild, the latter is more common. For commercial production, we want them on a primal cane, and part of the reason for that is there are a number of different cultivars or variations. As I mentioned, it's an oligospecies, and one of the things that the universities have done, primarily Missouri, but also we've got Savannah Institute working on it, and to a lesser extent, University of Minnesota, and then just the farmers themselves, is experimenting with different cultivars. I've got 13 different ones around my house in Yankton. And some of those are, just picked out of the wild. One sort of popped up in my yard. I don't know where it came from. It seems to be pretty good. And some of those ripen earlier than others. And so if you have determinants, you can sort of stage your crops so that they don't all come ripe at the same time, because they are hand harvested. There are no machines for harvesting, unlike aronia or the black currants, which can be machine harvested. Elderberry is not. I mean, even in Europe, they still hand harvest it. I mean, this is one of the things about pricing and why you can get a higher price for elderberries, because of the more labor that's required. But then you have to have a way to get that labor, and that is something where we have a bit of an advantage in competing against Europeans with price, as say aronia, which there are millions of acres of aronia berries in Poland, and it's all machine harvested, and they can do that very efficiently, and so the price is kind of low compared to elderberry, even though nutritional profiles are pretty much similar. I don't want to get into details. There are differences. And we do have also, when it comes to destemming, because you don't want the little stems in your harvested berries. They don't taste very good. And buyers don't want to see those either. And so what you'll find is with the different cultivars, also some of them release the berries more easily than others. There's also nutritional variation between them, and we started a program of testing some of the more popular commercial ones, so we can see and start learning the differences between cultivars, and then cultivars and like soil health and how those impact the nutrient levels in the berries. Now, also part of this is the ripening. In the wild, typically the selection is for uneven ripening, so that some escape the birds. But we in cultivation, we don't want that, because we don't want to have to go through picking too often. It's nice if you can get through one set of elderberry, one cultivar with 2 passes at the most, maybe a week apart. And then if you have a cultivar that comes ripe a week, 2 weeks, 10 days later, then you can go and do the other ones the following week or 2 weeks. So that helps in concentrating the labor. We do have mechanical assist in destemming. And so there's a shaker version that Terry Durham makes. Then there's several that have modified grape destemmers by removing some of the rollers and reducing the pressure. And you can get a couple 100 pounds an hour out of those. We have a project in Minnesota that's going to end up being partially funded because of the costs and things keep increasing on stainless. But we're working on a continuous flow that should be able to produce 1,000 pounds or more per hour. And that's what we need if we're going to do commercial scale and try to handle, 200 acres eventually. And then, of course, all along, what I've tried to do is try to not outpace production. We don't want, we have a little bit of extra in storage right now, but we don't want any more of that than possible. And so we're really focused on developing the market so that we can balance market demand and capability of supply of American berries, and the same time as we're educating buyers to switch from using the European to the American. Main reason I need to go commercial is I'm not getting any younger, and I've got to have a way to hire people and then to pay them. And we can get some volumes going, and then we should be able to support a staff to keep things going so that we can continue the research and improve market penetration and create a sort of a national network of decentralized hubs. where you get groups of farmers working together, and that way you can pool your assets and decide what you as a group want to do or focus on, because you don't have to do everything in one area. There's a picture. This is Terry Durham. I call him like the original commercial scale elderberry farmer. This is his destemmer here. And here I am when I was farming, working on it in Minnesota. And it runs on 220. The price is about $10,000. Some farmers have adjusted it. This was a schematic and just the idea that you have a wash station on a trailer so you can do infield harvesting and move it around. You've got a sink. This is the destemmer, and then you can put it in the freezer. Now, one of the reasons you need to freeze it right away is that elderberry comes ripe when the spotted wing Drosophila, which is the Asian fruit fly, is at its peak. And you can tell the bunches that are really bad that you shouldn't pick because of just the clouds of flies around them. But and you need to pick them and then get rid of those. We do think neem is helps to control it in the soil. Otherwise, the organic pesticides are quite expensive, and the short life cycle of SWD generally does not make that valuable. We do some other things to try to minimize that. These little flies do not like real heat, and they like to stay lower. So if you keep your grass between the rows cut, that helps. We also encourage growers to harvest the flowers that are lower down on the stalks, so that the area from about the ground level up 3 to 4 feet is clear of the cymes or flower clusters, and that way they don't, when they get berries, they don't be pulled by the weight of the berries toward the grass, and thus make it easier for them to become infested by the flies. But nonetheless, when you're picking, you can't tell if every berry is free of that. And in actual fact, the Asian fruit fly under the, as opposed to the North American fruit fly, does not spoil the taste of the fruit. So if you can't tell visually that the berries are infected and you pick them, destem them, and freeze them the same day, they are safe to eat. And the worst thing as far as production quality is you might get a little less juice out of them. But if you pick them and they're infected and you don't freeze them, well, in a couple of days, you can't sell those suckers. It's gone. So this is why you need a freezer close at hand and to cool the berries as quickly as possible once you pick them. And, the wash here is one way to help cool them, as you're bringing them in from the field. This is in Orange City, Iowa. And one of my farmers here, he's getting ready to retire, but he has this processing line, which is based on a modified grape destemmer. And then he's got a way where, he can dry the berries after it's come out of that and pick through it to make sure that, the stems and leaves and bugs are not there. Because, grasshoppers like the berries, deer like the berries, those kinds of things all vary. Sometimes people have trouble with Japanese beetles, and you have to put in a trap system with that, with probably, that powdered clay they put on things. It seems to work pretty well. And typically we pack 25 pounds in a 4-gallon food grade pail. This may change as we're getting into larger scale production and falling into, because other times you have buyers that will buy the boxes, like 40-pound boxes. This is, I bought this dryer from Flacker's Crackers, which was a Minnesota company that made it. And this was sitting in their office, and it was their original dryer to get their cracker business off the ground. That is all stainless. It's food grade. They paid $34,000 for it. I bought it for 3,000. I had to bug them a year for it, but no one else would buy it. So I got it and I sold it to that farmer there in Orange City for the same 3,000. He came down and got it and installed it in this trailer kitchen, which is an Iowa State inspected commercial kitchen. And that's where we've been drying the berries. And he's sold it back to the co-op, and we're going to move it up to Minnesota to Veterans Farming Initiative, which is a nonprofit farm as a member, owned or run by disabled veterans, and we're going to hire disabled veterans to run that operation, and also try to. We think we can get a team trained for picking. It's something that can be done seasonally by those folks. Smaller scale options, basically local direct. Some also do sell online. I've got a couple of them that focus more on the herbal side of things. And so they may have dried elderflowers and dried berries, but they'll also have chamomile or comfrey or some of those other herbs. I have quite a few people who have honey operations, and then they add some elderberry, and then they make various syrups and other products with their honey and the elderberry to give them a sort of another product to go along with selling just straight honey. And so that's some of them get into local stores, or there's in Minnesota we could do U-Pick. The thing about U-Pick with elderberries is you have to have people that know what they're doing. It's not as it's a little more difficult to get people trained in what to pick, versus say strawberries. But in the Twin Cities, we had a lot of Eastern Europeans who knew what an elderberry was. And so we were able to do U-Pick with elderberries and black currants. But that's not necessarily possible everywhere. And because of the labor challenges, I do my best to connect growers in an area, and hopefully they can get along and help each other in the harvesting and processing and things like that. Okay. Here's a picture of a flower. This is a wild one I have in my yard. I found it along Minnehaha Creek in Minneapolis. I call it Floribunda. It's not one that I would recommend for any large scale commercial, because this is not one you can cut to the ground. Typically with the determinate cultivars that will bear on a primal cane, which is preferred for commercial, we do cut it down at the end of every season. That helps keep everything in control. And it means also that it's a lot easier to pick on 1 year's growth than if you let it go, because they'll get too big and they'll have flowers in too many places. So that's one way to help manage the labor requirements. And also the University of Missouri found that if you do cut it down every year, then the cymes, which you're seeing a picture here is a cyme full of flowers, tend to be larger. So you can get more berries with one clip than you would normally find in the wild. These berries are okay. I mean, I eat these, but I have to let some of these fall off before I can pick them, because they're not as even ripers. This is a picture of an earlier plant. This is Adams. It's a New York cultivar. It's been around a long time. This is from the farm in Scandia. This was just 2 years after planting. Now, Paul had really good soil, so they didn't take long to get it established. Adams to me is a really great performer in northern. It is an indeterminate, but it isn't terribly indeterminate. It will seem to have like 2 crops in a year. So you'll get your primary flowers at the end of June, early July. And then in August, when the berries are coming ripe, you'll get a second row of flowers. So you might have the second flowers up here, and you'll be picking berries down here. This is Ranch. It's probably the #1 popular commercial variety. This is in Orange City. And he did not cut these as he should have. But So he does a lot of harvest work. Typically, if he had pruned these all the way down and you'd have more space between the aisles here. This is why you got to stay on top of things. But ranch is one of the earliest to ripen and to flower, and it's a little more tolerant of clay soils and dryness. It was found in Oklahoma, and then trialed by the University of Missouri. Bob Gordon is a close-up here of Terry. It's a little shorter, and it comes a little later than ranch. It has sweeter berries, and these cymes, probably because of their weight and other characteristics, typically hang down when they're ripe, and that makes it a little harder for the birds to get at them. And we are going to have a PDF available of this, so you don't have to take all these notes. I should have mentioned that earlier, but I have so much online like this in past presentations, so you'll have no lack of stuff. This is a close-up of the SWD. Elder also gets like some sawflies, and but they're not as big a problem. However, they could be. It's like any other pest, and maybe the first year it's worse, and then it's not so bad after. I never had very many, and I was basically able to handle them by hand or with a small spray of an organic pesticide. The Japanese beetle is more involved, but we have some articles on that. So what we're working on right now is developing in Montrose, Minnesota, which is about 40 miles west of Minneapolis. There's a first commercial hub. We learned there how to get it working, taking advantage of the many years, 15 plus years we have of developing partnerships with various organizations there in the university and the state. So we have access to this capital help, which is really great. And what we learned here, and I hope to replicate in other places. But we want to try to get as many of the problems knocked out before we start spreading things around. But we have the nice thing about the cooperative is we've been pretty open with our sharing of information to help each other to do better. And this grant that we're waiting on, it's probably going to run later than 20. It should have been 27. It should have funded last September, but it hasn't yet, and things are kind of stuck in DC. So we're waiting for that to start. But we're going to primarily focus on powder ingredients because that's one of the largest demand areas. You can put it in, of course, pills and drinks, and there's whole berry powders, like for baby foods. There's juice powders that you could do, like for power drinks. I mean, elderberry is great for muscle recovery and things like that as well, because again, it's a huge anti-inflammatory. And the problem always is, like, if you want to do any of this commercial production of powders or flash freezing or whatever, they normally require huge volumes. And the other problem is access, and elderberry coming ripe when so many other things are coming ripe. So we need to, acquire, develop, and trial mid-scale production so that we can handle, tens of thousands of pounds easily, as opposed to, say, hundreds of pounds on a small farmer scale, in order to make commercial production competitive, because we have to compete with the European ingredients that are imported, and they have had infrastructure in place for hundreds of years. So they have a big advantage in that. We're trying to catch up on it. But we've been, and also beginning to start to be able to employ other people other than myself. And we've gotten some support outside of the government from the Walton Family Foundation, and they have another division with builders grants. And so that's why I can say probably in 3 years, this hub should be up and running. Okay, I guess that's it. Questions?
Chris, I have one for you. I've always wondered why these markets, everybody thinks that we're going to have American-made products as a forefront, especially now in this current political environment. And yet when the money comes forward, people have to buy. There still seem like there could be a lot of expansion in many types of specialty fruits in America, even with the labor the way it is. But where is the bottleneck? Why doesn't this take off?
Okay, so some of it's economics, which really means it gets down to education. And here's the thing. Like I said, my grandfather was a naturopath. My father did not do that, but he grew up, and so like when I was growing up, I mean, the only time I got pop was when we went to a friend's birthday party. And the only time I ever had white bread was when I begged them to try to imitate the Sunbeam bread commercial that I saw on the TV, and because it could rip right down the middle, and but there was nothing to the bread, so I never wanted it again. I just thought it was cool to be able to rip that bread as a kid. But that's and so that's the thing. I'm not a good example in that sense because when I was 10 years old, I was reading Adele Davis and Rodale books and things like that, and most people don't, and it's a rat race, and everyone's working. The whole education, the advertising system is against it. I worked for Pillsbury for 5 years, from 95 to 2000. I worked a couple years with engineers, and then 3 years with international R&D. I primarily provided IT support, but I worked with new product development and like and on both sides. Like when I was with the engineering, I worked with them on the production of the Grand's biscuit when they introduced the Grand size biscuit. And then in international R&D, I worked a lot with Haagen-Dazs International in new product development. And and then just basically managing research data, across the country and across the world. And then had special projects. But the thing is other than say Haagen-Dazs at Pillsbury, the emphasis was not on quality of ingredients. It was on convenience, taste, and how fast can we get an extra 100 biscuits through the machine in an hour, type of thing. And so that's the whole thing. And I mean, what people don't realize is that you go back when I was a kid in the 50s, and if you went to the local grocery store, it was like going to Whole Foods today. As far as what you had to pay for food and the fact that you had more nutrition in the food, the price on food has not gone up as, say, the price on almost everything else, especially things like education and healthcare have gone through the roof. And that's because the quality has been degraded. And it's not just that we got more efficient, the overall quality is degraded, and people just have gotten used to it over and over year. And they don't realize the connection of what they're eating with the health. I mean, people like Robert Kennedy Jr. and some others have been trying to, educate the public about that. And prevention is worth so much more. I mean, and then I don't even get into the other aspects when you start dealing with electromagnetic radiation, pesticides and herbicides, the glyphosate. We all pee glyphosate, it's a matter of how much or how little are you doing. And of course, less is better on things like that. So that, I think, is the big, people need to know why they have to pay more, and why they need to go to their local farmer to buy eggs, for instance, and just simple things like that. And that's why I said at the beginning that education is going to be part of your process. People need to know, and they need to be willing to try, and they need to have some patience. They need to know up front that this isn't, if you have an accident or this is where Western medicine can come in to try to deal with broken bones and severe crisis. But your overall health is what do you do all your life? What do you do day to day? And so it makes a difference whether you're consuming seed oils or whether you're consuming olive oil, or if you're using your local elderberry or buying, chickens or beef from your local farmer. That all makes a huge, huge difference. So I think that's the main thing. People have to realize that, hey, I'm spending more for food now, but I'm not going to have the health issues later. My folks divorced when I was 14, and my mother did not have much money, but she never, never cut back on food. She knew the quality of food, and she was a great cook. I mean, I'm not what I'd call a star cook, but I tell you, I'm still preparing all my food. I probably only eat out is when I travel to a conference. So, or if the kids come and we're celebrating a birthday or something. Otherwise, I'm preparing my own food, and I grow a lot of my own food for that reason. And people have to understand that value, and then to be willing to pay for it. And then the key is to have the patience to see the results.
Yeah. Yeah, I always wondered how the economics can possibly work out. Europe is subsidizing their farmers.
Yeah.
And of course, America is too, but not specialty growers.
No,
So,
we're subsidizing the big guys that are producing the high fructose corn syrup that send people to the hospital and to the doctor for pharmaceuticals.
so they pick this stuff in Europe, process it, put it in containers, which have the prices gone way, way up, and it's
Yeah.
stayed up.
Yeah.
And yet, the companies that buy this product in America, they have got to be, they should be knocking your doors down, Chris. Really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Product.
I do hope that maybe out of the chaos of the present administration, some messaging will get out and start to get to people that maybe they really should start to look at their labels. And if nothing else, I think, people can get the idea, well, if I can't pronounce it and there's too much of this stuff on the length of the label, then maybe I should look for something else.
Yeah, for sure. One last question. You mentioned spotted wing Drosophila.
Yeah.
The we had oh my, it must be 15, 20 years ago was when we first found out about SWDs in our vineyard with raspberries.
Yeah.
And how we found out was you pick a plate of raspberries and a bowl and put it on your counter overnight. And if you're lucky, 2 days later, but probably the next day, you got worms crawling out of the
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah.
But you eat them and you don't even know it. But commercially, what has happened to spotted wing Drosophila population around this region just generally? Is it getting worse?
I think my experience and I do get, because, if I go to conferences, they're talking about other fruits as well for SWD, is it varies. So, if you get a real cold winter, then, it's going to come later to our part of the world. They will eventually get blown in here from a warmer area. But it really, it varies a lot. I mean, with the elderberry, some years, well, most of the years, I haven't had too much to worry about. We had one year when I was farming with Paul when it was a little more noticeable. But the main thing is picking promptly once they're ripe. And this here again is where the labor management issue comes in. Because elderberries are not something that, oh, today is the day I should be picking and it's Tuesday, but I can't, so I'll put it off to Saturday when I don't have to go to work. That's not going to do with elderberries.
No. Well, for grapes, we pick based on specific indices, pH, titratable acid, and Brix.
Yeah.
And we have for each variety, it has its own parameters.
We're
Is that
working on that.
You don't have a standard right now? It's just mouth taste and let's pick them, boys.
Well,
Huh?
if people, there are people who are familiar with Brix and they will use that. But what we're trying to do, and we've had one project with that, is to set some standards on it. Now, Paul, he was like 40 years a grower, and he grew all these different berries. I mean, he had a practometer, and he did all that for us. So uh, that was I leaned on him. I mean, I wouldn't have started the co-op without him because he was the grower resource. Unfortunately, he died from Lyme disease after we'd only been together 6 years, and he was a farm manager, not an owner. And so, I also lost access to those fields. But by then, the co-op was also getting too big, and I was too busy trying to help growers all over the place. So, I mean, God works these things out. I mean, we don't always have answers as to why and when some of these things happen in life, but um, that's the key on that, is that it's a matter of establishing, these parameters. I mean, it's very difficult for any specialty crop to get any kind of research grant as compared to the big crops or the pharma. University of Missouri is winding up on a $5 million grant this year. And they are going to sponsor in June a second international symposium. We had the first in 2013 that I attended. So, that's and the thing is like, so for years trying to get the University of Minnesota to do anything, basically horticulturally, he said, well, they're doing fine picking the wild, so why bother? There was no money for them to develop a new cultivar or a hybrid of some kind. I mean, elderberry's genome is huge. It's several times larger than the human genome, and they can't do the CRISPR accurately enough as much as they'd like you to believe. So, basically, nature's producing all of this variety, and it's been more cost effective and realistic to see what can we find. And so, I've always encouraged growers to experiment with what's growing next to them and see how that works. And out of that, we have identified some things that I think are superior candidates for commercial production in a particular area. And the other thing about elder is that even though most of them are self-fertile American, they do better if you have more than one cultivar open at the same time in bloom. And that is just seems to be reality as well.
When you get one head that's ripe and I'm probably on primocane, are the berries all the same level of ripeness in these big heads
That
that we used to have?
varies. Okay, so that's going to vary by cultivar and exposure to the sunlight. So this is another reason for harvesting the flowers lower down, because then you're getting those cymes up, so they will ripen more evenly, as well as being further away because the SWD likes to stay close to the ground. So, and then by cultivar, and that's why I said on some of them, you got to sort of wait till a couple of the berries have started to fall off, and then you harvest the whole cyme, because that way you're not having to sort through and not have fully ripe berries. There is a certain tolerance. You just definitely don't want any green berries, and you want to have the majority of them being a dull, dark finish. And based on your soil chemistry, they could be a little redder than black, but they'd still be ripe. I mean, if you start seeing them fall off or the birds go at them, it's time.
For sure.
Chris, we have a question in the chat. Can you speak a little bit to how commercial growers handle birds? Are they using netting or other methods?
Birds vary by location. So we had a farm in Winona right along the Mississippi Flyway, and they had totally net. Okay. Where we were in Scandia, our only problem with birds was around the edges of the field, because they'd sit in the hedgerow and they come and so every now and then you'd come to a sign that had been pooped on, and you just had to trash it. And you couldn't leave it, because if you did, then SWD get it, and you're breeding those suckers. So, because you can't do those. Now, one of the things about Adams as a cultivar that's very dependable, it will grow when a lot of things won't. and come back if there's wind damage. But on its cyme, it tends to have two-stage ripening. So, every cyme has got like 5 fingers. And so with the Adams, you'll get 2 of them that are ripe earlier, then you get the other 3. So you almost always have to go through twice on Adams. So and then it really also depends on your weather. The nice sunny days are good. You want to be picking like from 9 to noon in the sunlight and when things are dry. But if you have cloudy days or you get a bad rain, I mean, we had one year that just heavy rain knocked, a third of our berries off, because the timing in nature wasn't ideal for, all the different aspects of life that come together. So there's no set answer on that. That is one of the challenges. And this is also why, though, people with smaller production have found it easier to be successful, because if you've got an acre to 2 acres and you've got, at least a few people to work, not just all by yourself, you can go through that field more often. I mean, if you've got a economic situation where you're not away from the farm all day, and to stay on top of that, and also that you're able to provide a little more field hygiene on a regular basis. You got to get those. You can mow between them pretty good, and that keeps a lot of your weeds under control. But you will get bindweed, or you'll get a thistle or something in the row itself, and you gotta yank that out by hand. So that's kind of or if you get a stalk that falls over, you need to cut it and get rid of it so that you're not obstructing your mowing, because you don't want that to get too. Well, the other thing about mowing is if you don't mow, then the canes spread by the roots and they'll just fill in, and then it's a disaster. You got a jungle.
Chris, where do we buy it if we wanted to buy 25 or 50 of one variety? Who's got the commercial kind of pricing?
I'm recommending Terry Durham's website, riverhillsharvest.com. He is a licensed nursery, and he does replace them if you've got, for some reason, you got a bunch that don't germinate. I mean, elderberry are about as good as willow to cut and stick and grow. Okay, the main thing with it, I mean, you can use root hormone. I've never have. The main thing is they can't dry out, and you've got weed control in the first year in particular. After they're established, they will outcompete, almost all your weeds. And in fact, some years back, I was talking to a national forest guy there along the Mississippi, and he said, elderberry outcompete buckthorn. And, that was one of the things, they are just really good where they do grow. And they will grow in the shade, but they won't produce in the shade. They need to have at least partial sun. Full sun is better.
River Hills Harvest.
Harvest.com.
Oh, okay.
Riverhillsharvest.com. Yeah. Down in Missouri. I have all of these resources on my website. So if you go to the Grow mini site, there's a resources page. There are some other local farmers that supply. I do some cuttings here around Yankton to people that want to try it from out of my yard. But I'm not really a primary source for any of that. It's just something I do, kind of like Johnny Appleseed.